running late and it's a long day, but it has been a really inspirational and exciting day. And from Northern Ireland, we're not in a great place. I mean, you talk about the rise of UKIP. UKIP's making no progress at all in Northern Ireland. That's because we actually have a government that has 4 ministers who are creationists, who are challenging the educational curriculum because they think children should also be taught in school that there's a distinct possibility or probability that the world was made in 7 days and is only 9,000 years old. We have a government, both sides of it, effectively, which agree that women should not have access at all to the pregnancy terminations because it is against the teaching of God and Christendom. And we actually had a conversation not too many months ago as to whether women who drink in pregnancy, we should make that a criminal offence. So there's no real room for UKIP. Not a great place to be. But so people have for quite a while been depressed, and then they look at me and say, because I was depressed, I was actually depressed in 1998, 99. I got over it. So people who are still depressed look at me saying, what's she so perky about? And I keep saying to them, you should be working on the independence vote for Scotland. I actually thought, well, they sent us James Connolly, he screwed it up. The very least I could do is get back over there and give them a hand. And so collaborating and working over the past 2 years with Radical Independence Campaign has been really good for me before we go anywhere else. So thank you all very much for retaining my sanity, faith in humanity, and belief that grassroots organising, sticking to your principles, fighting the argument, and holding the line actually works. Instead of crying into your beer that somebody betrayed you somewhere. No time for that. But what is the impact of what's happening in extending that discussion? And I think it's very important. Some of it has already been raised. We start with the left first, because it's my colleagues on the left who say what she's skipping over and back to Glasgow for. And then they kind of, 2 years ago, they kind of went, huh. And then last year, when I actually tweeted them back, it was my first tweet actually, it was from here somewhere. I'm going to have to figure it out just to put manners on them. And I tweeted back, there are 2,000 people at this conference. And a very old and much loved and trusted comrade of mine said, in your imagination. So I sent back a wee picture. So this morning I sent 3,000 this time. You should have joined. But what has been very, very important for the left, and it has been mentioned, is traditionally within the small left groupings, which includes all our socialist friends of various shapes, of Trotskyists and non-Trotskyists, and the whole lot. I never did get my head around all of it. But all of the small sects who don't really understand where sectarianism comes from in a political sense have had this common sense that nationalism divides, which is true. And therefore anything that's about national identity, anything that's about the self-determination of national groupings has been backward in their thinking and should not be on the agenda of left-wing groups. And there are still some left-wing organisations not quite getting that, but they've missed the boat a wee bit, and you'll see them as you continue to grow. You'll see them hopefully coming in, or like the Labour Party disappearing. But so one of the very big things that you have taken back is that the question of self-determination is a fundamental democratic issue. It's a democratic issue. It's a democratic issue for individuals. The right of self-determination is the same question as the right of a woman to control her own body without somebody else legislating for her. The right of self-determination is the same question of workers organising themselves to ensure, and I think it's a very modest, I don't even think it's a radical issue, for workers to demand a fair share of the wealth that their labour produces in terms of getting a reasonable wage. I think workers should own the means of production of wealth since they produce the wealth. I've never been able to get my head round why that's an extreme argument. You know, if you bake a cake, nobody says, the hen owns the eggs, the miller owns the flour. If you bake a cake, you're allowed to eat it, unless you're a worker. So, one of the big things that you have done is take that question of the right of self-determination back into the conversation of the left, back into the socialist conversation, and a recognition and the opening of that debate again that internationalism is not a uniform workers' cold economic argument, but is a solidarity of diversity of people in the commonality of labour and working class humanity and solidarity. So that is an international favour that you have done for everybody. For national movements that are not always all that progressive, you know, for that all-class alliance around national self-determination, you have changed the conversation that says, as James Connolly himself said in the context of Ireland, you can take down the Union Jack, you can take away the red pillar boxes, and you can paint them all green. You can create an independent nation, but unless you fundamentally change the nature of that society, England will still rule you, and this will still be a place unfit for working people to live in. So you've changed the national conversation around independent Scotland, around the, if you like, the historic nationhood of people. Because nations are kinships and states are citizenships. That's a big psychological conversation for people who want to do a thesis. But it doesn't mean it's not true. So you have kinships of people who constitute historically Scotland. And you have changed that debate from being a narrow national historical debate of how many generations of your ancestors you can trace back and who's more Scottish than anybody else, but that it is a social, it is a solidarity, it is an economic debate around social justice, and it's in that context of everybody who is here and who wants to be here and who proposes to come here or leave here, being part of that wider conversation. So it's not an exclusive, narrowing debate. And key to that has been its diversity. It's diversity around gender, it's diversity around interest groups, it's diversity around national grouping. And key to what you've done in that is to include the anti-racist debate, to include the pro-immigration debate. And that perhaps is the single biggest contribution in terms of challenging the existing debate. You've also just driven, and that has been explained, a horse and cart through the concept of British democracy. Where I come from, those two things don't actually sit together. We don't tend to ever use those two words in the same juxtaposition is a big word, but we wouldn't use them in the same paragraph, never mind the same sentence, unless in order to achieve democracy we need to get rid of. But I think those are two key things. Everybody has also referred to the question of hope. And I think that's true. But in a very practical way, it is also a question of example. It's the methodology in the way that you have done it. You have been able to create a solidarity movement, a collective movement that is diverse in its strands. And having the focal point of the referendum maybe helps in that. But you have also used a democratic methodology. This has been open organising. It has used, mass protests. It has used gatherings. It has used registering people for the vote. It has opened up discussion and debate. So you have brought back, if you like, self-determination and democracy and the right of everybody to articulate an opinion in a way that is in people's heads, but not in their methodology, in the way that they work. So in a strange way, what you are doing here is not only challenging, for example, the limitations and broadening the horizons of the Socialist Nationalist Party, you are scaring the living wits out of Sinn Féin. For that, I personally thank you. And the reason I say that is that if you want to know how to do it wrong, look at us. Where did it go wrong for us? And it's where it could go wrong for you. Where it go wrong to us, the spider said, welcome to my parlour, said the spider to the fly. And flattery went on. There was a while there, about 1996, 97, 98, when something happened in the media. Jerry Adams, for example, who wasn't allowed to be heard for years, who was the personification of all evil, suddenly was a statesman. And he got to shake hands. Tony Blair. He got to rub shoulders with presidents and the IRA, who were on the verge of, that was a long, sad war of attrition. But suddenly, the media described them as the most sophisticated military organisation. Jesus wept, I said. Pardon me, the people that is offended. But if you fall for that, with 50% of your membership locked up during life, you're not hard to fool. But that is seductive. That is seductive. Then the next bit, it's not unique to us. We are at a standstill, so let's negotiate. Let's come into my parlour, let's do a deal. I'm not against the peace, but I am and remain against the process. So the first thing that was determined was who was allowed in. Only the most sophisticated military organisation, only the people with the potential to be statesmen, and the socialists were left out. And Sinn Féin allowed the socialists to be left out. The next thing was we'll have conversations in secret. Don't tell the people, because if the people knew, they mightn't agree with you and it'll hold up the proceedings. The next bit is with your beauty and my brains, or my beauty and your brains, we could make a coalition. And bit by bit, it's a very simple phenomenon. Please do not try this, or the Greens and animal lovers will be upset. If you see a little frog and you drop it into a pot of boiling water, what will happen? Theoretically and practically? No. If you put it in, it will jump out. It is programmed instinctively. As soon as it hits the hot water, its little legs get it out of danger fast. If you put a frog in a pot of cold water, and heated to boiling point, what do you get? Dead. So, what is likely to happen in the future, and you need to be aware of it, and I'll give you, before I sit down, just a couple of tips, is one. A prerequisite for allowing anybody to get your vote for a Westminster seat from Scotland is that they swear on whatever they believe in, mothers' graves, Bibles or anything, that they will not go into coalition with any party in forming a government. Never take responsibility for what you can't control. So that needs to be a prerequisite. Nobody is going to London to help run the place. Stamp it on our foreheads. We are going to destroy this place, not help it to work. So nobody is allowed to go, no party is allowed to be voted for, unless there is a cast iron guarantee that they sit on the opposition benches. Then the next person, be very wary of electing or voting for a person who wants to be a politician. Select your candidates and vote for the candidates who don't really want to be politicians and who don't intend stopping there very long. Your ideal politician will have neither manners nor breeding. That's like me. They will be so uncompromising that there are days they aren't safe to let out. They will be blunt speaking. They will be resilient. And they will have absolutely no respect for the mother of parliaments or the parliamentary system. Otherwise, however well-intentioned, that little frog will be boiled. And they will come back up on the train and they'll tell you, start to explain to you how you really need to do the thing differently and how really it might be better to stay, and you'd be as well cut that trouble off at the start by being very, very clear that, and history tells you that before, be very, very clear who you send down the road to negotiate with the English ruling class. Better you send a person who in the olden days would have had their head cut off and stuck upon a pike than you send somebody because they've got negotiating skills and they can talk and they can do whatever. That won't work. But what is really happening here is the beginning of the reclaiming of democracy for the mass of the people, which is what democracy is supposed to be about. Reclaiming the resources for the working people, not because we think we're better at it than somebody else, because we have reached a point in our civilization that if the working people do not take back collectively the human resources that allow us to survive, we will not survive. Only enough people to continue to make wealth for the wealthy will ever survive. They don't care if we starve. They don't care if people die of Ebola, they don't care if people starve in Africa, and they don't care if people starve in Scotland. So it's not just some ideological quirk that we think would be better at it than them. The survival of the people of these islands depends on all of us following your example. And I think you have set us all a high bar and a good example. I'd say one thing in terms of my comrade from Wales. We have a proverb in Ireland that says, a country without a language is a country without a soul. And the only bit missing from your radical independence is recognising this country not only has a soul, it has a language. Thank you.